So this weekend is always an interesting weekend for me because I know my Twitter feed is going to start getting a little riled up because of the SEC's run in the NFL draft. So I might have lit a fire and just tossed a match in just a total blaze and then ran off and watched it burn because after the first round was there, the SEC had the most players drafted of any other conference and they start coming out. And I said, well, if you take out Bama, is it that impressive? It's the same as the Big Ten. The Big Ten had more in the first round. And so after the entire draft plays out again, if you take out Bama, the gap doesn't look quite as wide. And there were all kind of, then I'm just getting pelted with just all kind of bombs coming in at me. I'm trying to dodge them. So I just get out of there. And clearly, yes, if you took Ohio State out of the Big Ten, if you took Clemson out of the ACC, the top tier teams.
If you take Pitt out of the ACC, because right, Pitt led the ACC in draft picks.
They had 6, which was really impressive. But the storyline, the mantra of the SEC is so dominant because they've had this run. I think it's a master marketing job by the SEC. Because it helps them in recruiting because they're all selling, hey, if you come to the SEC, look, we have the most players drafted every single year. It helps in the perception of them. Everybody loves to talk about it. When you dive into the numbers, and you guys may say you're completely off your rocker, they have, on average, 15 to 20 more players drafted than next closest conference. The difference in those is probably a bunch of guys that were drafted in the 6th and 7th round. We saw kickers and long snappers drafted. Does that really matter that much? Is that a problem that they're dominating that much? I would say Alabama's dominance in the draft is a way bigger problem than the SEC's dominance in the draft history. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that Alabama just deserves the headline for tying the Miami class.
Right.
6 first-round picks ties Miami for the most first-round picks. 8 picks in the first 2 rounds is the most of all time. A bunch of teams had gotten up there to have 7 picks in the first 2 rounds, including Alabama, which did it in last season, 2020. LSU did it last season, 2020 with 7 in the first 2 rounds, and Alabama in 2017 all had 7, 6 times overall, but 8 players in the first 2 rounds. That's a little bit, that's unique. That's going to push that SEC count, which, as you mentioned, 65 players drafted in the first 259 picks. That is the most by any single conference in the common draft era. So 65, new record just set by the SEC. The previous record was the SEC, which had it with 64. So just 1 less than that. That included Josh Allen, Kentucky, not Wyoming, Josh Jacobs, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Quinnen Williams. And then in 2020, the SEC again had 63 picks, as did the 2013 SEC draft. I will say that this particular run where you've got 64 in 2019, 63 in 2020, then 65 here in 2021, I think that that's a little bit of an outlier, probably driven by Alabama. If Alabama's going to be setting records as a school, then those are going to be those extra 3, 4, 5 picks that are going to take the SEC over the top. I don't think that it's sustainable. I don't think the SEC will continue to keep breaking its own record year after year. And at some point, the SEC is going to, come back just a little bit, which in turn means that the gap is going to lessen. This feels like a spike that's a little bit even beyond the fact that the SEC year after year after year after year seems to be number 1 on that conference big board.
I'm not sure I buy that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's going one way.
Yeah.
You think that it's the SEC will continue to break its own record?
Well, hello, they have way more
talent
teams than the Big 12 and the Pac-12, so that gives them an enormous advantage.
But even on a per team advantage, so
SEC is the only conference in the country this year that every school had at least 1 player drafted.
For first round picks, the last 7 drafts. So basically, since Louisville joined the ACC, SEC 73, ACC 39, Big Ten 39. It's not close.
To your point, Tom, because they love running that line too. Does that mean Vanderbilt's a good team? No offense. I feel like every time we say something about Vanderbilt this year, we're gonna have to be sorry.
No, but it shows that I agree. I think Alabama kind of like the results on the field carries the load. Like it is the big deal, but there's still just far more depth to that conference from a talent level, because if we look, the SEC had 65 players drafted. The Big Ten was in second with 44. If we take Alabama out of the equation, Alabama had 9 players. That's still 56 players. That's still 12 more than the next closest conference had, even without its best team. If you take Ohio State out of the Big Ten's total, they're going to fall way down the rankings in that one, because it's I don't think it's changing. I think like there were maps. I can't remember who published them, but it was just a map of where every single player that was drafted was from. And shocker, the overwhelming majority of players that were drafted this year are from the Southeast. They didn't necessarily play in the SEC, but they're from that region of the country. Florida had more than anybody, unless you're Brian Fisher and you're doctoring the results to make it look like Texas had more. But like that entire region had more players produced that went to the NFL in the draft. It's only natural that that region is where the schools are and where those players are mostly going to go. And then you combine the actual results of the conference. I don't see it changing anytime soon.
There is a way, I think, and it would be if Texas and USC and Florida State and maybe like Michigan, if they're turning more of their highly rated recruits into first rounders, that's the way you could cut into the SEC's lead by a little bit. But nobody will overtake them. Like the talent in this country is becoming more concentrated on the Southeast, not less. We have less talent in California than we used to have. We have less talent in the Northeast and the Midwest than we used to have. Like
so you think it's like that's
the trend is exactly the opposite of what Chip and Danny are saying. I think. Like
wait. But I wasn't saying the trend is going to change. I was saying we read too much into the trend as determining national champions, determining teams that get to the playoff. Like that byline helps them tremendously, and it is a fact. And I don't think it changes. But because Vanderbilt gets a player drafted doesn't mean their schedule's a gauntlet. Like that's the thing that bothers me is, it's the toughest. Like you look at the Texas A&M schedule next year is not that bad. Like, yeah, they got to play Bama, which friendly. Is brutal. Like, but that's the storyline of, we have all these players drafted. We're the toughest conference. It helps them tremendously in a sport where perception matters. And rankings matter. Preseason rankings matter. So I don't think it changes. I think the SEC's run will continue. And I don't think, I think you could maybe cut into it a little bit, but I don't think you'll ever I think the SEC will have the most players drafted for the next 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
Forever.
But I think to further go into this, this was a number from Peter Burns, who was just clearly trying to troll.
I set him off too. Like I'm sure he's out at me.
This was nothing but a troll tweet, but there is something to it that I think you can't ignore. It was draft picks faced by college football teams during the regular season last year. Georgia faced 43, Alabama faced 42, A&M faced 41, Clemson 34, Notre Dame 32, Oklahoma 17, Cincinnati 13, Ohio State 9.
How many games did Ohio State play?
6.
Wait, was this the regular
exactly.
season?
Yes. Yeah. So that impacts it.
But if you do it by game, so that's 4.3 per game for Georgia. If you divide Ohio State's 9 games by 6, that's 1.5. It's still nearly 3 times as many on a rate.
So
this is regular season only or counts the playoffs?
Yeah, regular. Last regular season.
Got it.
So my argument was that I just don't see it continue. Like I want to celebrate this particular collection of talent and also suggest that it would blow my mind if we just continue to see it where 66 gets broken in the next year or two, and then it becomes 67 and they just continue to push this out more and more and more. Like, I think that landing somewhere at 63 or 62, that wouldn't be a huge surprise. And I think that maybe the path that you mentioned, Bud, is a little bit more of seeing these other programs that get players who are projected to be top picks and actually providing the kind of environment where they develop into that, where they end up matching some of their projections. So go ahead.
Is there one more thing to bring up that kind of goes to the point you and Danny are trying to make that gets kind of lost? Now, there is context of when the players have been taken, but as far as that gap closing, in the last 3 years, because we spent so much time talking about that Alabama 2017 recruiting class and how amazing it was and all that stuff, and it is, because, again, all those first rounders.
8 first-round picks from one recruiting class.
Mm-hmm. Alabama has had 28 players selected in the last 3 drafts. Ohio State has had 28 players selected in the last 3 drafts. So if you want to look at it from that angle, when it might not be so much SEC as it could be college football playoff. If we start looking at the draft from playoff schools compared to non-playoff schools,
ooh, that's a great.
I bet you're going to see a big kind of correlation in the trend there.
Tweeting it out right now.
Hey, no, you just got a segment for the radio show tomorrow.
That's exactly. And that is problematic. As much as we spend time and we've seen all this marketing from the SEC, which I agree. I think it's genius. And the ACC did count Notre Dame this year, but I saw like the NCAA didn't. And like, if I was Jim Phillips, I'd be on the phone like, hey, those were our guys. We're getting those counted for us. This year they played in the championship game.